Consulting regarding Mobuoy illegal waste site, to receive a briefing from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs on the Emission Trading Scheme, and to consider an essay on the statutory instrument on the British Wool Marketing Scheme, Amendment Order 2024. To remind you to turn your mobile phones back on when you're leaving the meeting. So that means switch them off now, please, or at least on the silent. Okay, we have a quorum. We'll go into public session now. Okay, just give it a minute. Are we out there? Okay, just to remind members that the meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings online. I continue to remind you about the enhanced audio and video equipment in the committee rooms, so side conversations are likely to be picked up by the microphones. Okay, just to remind those in the public gallery that to switch your mobile phones off or on silent as well, and there are no photographs or recording of the meeting to take place. Members, any new declaration of interest? Nope. Apologies, one from Anya Murphy. Patsy McLone said he'd be 15 minutes late. Any others? No. Okay, item 2, Chairperson's business. Members, I refer you to page 3 of the table of papers. The Renewable Heat Association Limited have requested to brief the committee on the production of bioenergy and its importance on rural environment. Members, I'm conscious that there are still potentially unresolved legal issues in relation to the non-domestic RHA scheme. So are you content to schedule a briefing at some stage or put them on the agenda, provided that we make it clear that they're not to deal with any matters that may be subject to the legal proceeds? Okay. Second Chair's business is on the 22nd of February we considered a request from Farmers for Action on behalf of the Northern Ireland Farm Groups requesting to brief the committee in an informal session. The informal session is now in the forward work programme for Tuesday the 30th of April, room 29 at 1 p.m. If that's okay, it's a lunchtime meeting, just to try and, because they'd asked for an informal meeting. The Farmers for Action.
Which room?
29. Is that okay?
3rd April.
30th? 30th.
30th, sorry.
Tuesday the 30th. Yeah.
Right.
It's a Tuesday. We decided to try and do it when we're here, if that's fair.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Draft minutes, members. Agenda item 3. Refer you to the draft minutes of the 11th of April 2024, are in the packet 6, pages 6 to 16. Members, have you any comments, or are you happy that the minutes are okay as drafted? All right. Okay. Thank you. Get it, James. Thank you. Okay, agenda item 4, matters arising. A couple that I want to raise. Pages 17 to 20 of your pack. The department response dated the 9th of April in reply to our letter of the 24th of March requesting further information on the proposal to amend Regulation EU 2017-852 on mercury, which will prohibit the use of dental amalgam from the 1st of January 2025 and the manufacture, import and export of certain mercury added products from the 31st of December 2025 to the 31st of December 2027. The regulation is listed in the Windsor framework and applies to Northern Ireland. DAERA is the policy lead, however the Department of Health takes the lead on any health related provisions. From DAERA's interest, the Department confirms that the impact of these prohibitions and any potential divergence is expected to be minimal due to the hazardous nature of mercury and its compounds. Mercury added products have been subject to restrictions for a long time. Are you happy to note, or is anybody any comment that was raised here as a query? Happy to note?
Been note.
Okay. Other matters arising. Victoria Square residents. There are 2 matters here arising. First is on pages 21 to 27 of your pack, and it's from the clerk to the Committee for Finance regarding Victoria Square residential apartments. Clerk updates the committee that with regard to the rates applied to the apartments, Land and Property Service now has evidence that allows rates paid on the apartments since they have been empty to be reimbursed. Regarding the change into the limitations order following a transfer of functions from DERA to DFC, the Minister of Finance has now set out a process for this to happen and has confirmed that her department has no legislative role. Content with that? It has been obviously brought to the Assembly in a ministerial statement recently, so hopefully there's progress there. Also at pages 17 to 33 of your table papers, the response from the Assembly Legal Services regarding our request for legal advice regarding the changing of the limitation to orders following a transfer of functions from DERA to DFC. This just came in yesterday, members, and it is quite detailed, it's quite long. It's privileged and restricted, so we can't discuss it in public. I'm happy that we do it at the end of the meeting in private if you so wish, or we can leave it for a week and maybe do it at our away day or planning day next week. What do you feel? To be fair, the process has moved on anyway.
Yeah.
But having a quick scan at the legal information, it's more or less dealing with difficulties that might arise as the legislation comes forward. So what's your thoughts? I'm happy to deal with it later today. I don't see a great lot. There's no urgency in any of it that I've seen, unless anybody else has picked up anything. And if you want, we can deal with it next week.
I would ask Chair that we'll leave it to next week.
Okay.
And bring it through next week again.
Okay. Deal with it informally anyway,
Yeah.
and if there's any formal issue. Fair enough?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Next item arising that I have is page 5, your table papers, the response from the Public Accounts Committee regarding the query regarding the Northern Ireland Audit Office report. The Public Accounts Committee clerk informs this committee, PAC has agreed to place a hold and retain primacy around the report. So I suppose that's what we were looking clarity on, members. Again, at some stage we might want to revisit that, but that's up to us. At this stage, PAC are taking it forward. Matters arising, pages 6 to 16 of your table papers. It's again a response from the Assembly Legal Services regarding the request for advice regarding the decision taken by the Department to replace the Ammonia standing advice with a case-by-case basis approach in the absence of the completion of an equality impact assessment. I refer you to paragraphs 24 to 32 of the response. Again, this is advice is privileged and restricted. I think, Declan, that was you raised that matter.
Mm-hmm.
Have you any comment, or do you want to discuss it in closed session at the end?
We just noted for now, sir.
Noted for that. Okay, thank you. Okay, matters arising on pages 34 to 36 of your table papers. Department response dated 17th of April in reply to our letter of the 25th of March, where we requested further information on the public inquiry to be held into Dalradian and gold mine proposals. Planning Appeals Commission has decided to co-join the hearings on the 4 environmental authorisation applications by Dalradian alongside the planning applications relating to the proposal. Again, Declan, this was you raised this. Are you content with the response, or have you any?
Yeah, well, it's just, obviously as a scrutiny committee, it's just keeping tabs on, because it's quite a big application, and it has there's a lot of public interest and concern around the proposal. So, from a scrutiny point of view, I think it's important that we get a sense of the approach that the department has taken, and that they're adequately and robustly prepared to participate in it.
Okay. Happy enough then that we
Yeah.
keep that watching brief?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay. All right, members, have anybody else any matters arising there before we move on? No? Okay, agenda item 5. It's PCI Consulting regarding Mobuoy illegal waste site. Refer you to the papers in your pack. There is a briefing PowerPoint from PCI Consulting on pages 28 to 60 of your pack. So I welcome Daniel McAteer here. You're very welcome, Daniel. And we have Michael McLaughlin, who's in the public gallery. You're very welcome. So there is a comprehensive PowerPoint presentation there, Daniel, and we'll ask you to give us a presentation that'll last a maximum 10 minutes, please. And then you'll be open for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks members of the committee and the staff of the committee for giving us the opportunity to speak to you. I'm Daniel McAteer, just head of PCI Consulting, and we're a multidisciplinary consultancy and project management company. Back in 2015, we were approached by a number of residents and farmers and veterinary people and business people generally in the area that we come from, who were concerned about the Mobuoy issue and the seemingly lack of progress about what was being done, and we were asked to develop a solution for it. And to cut a very long story short, we set about assembling what we believe to be a world-class team of experts who are capable of providing a comprehensive solution to this problem. And we have tried to engage with various agencies since 2015. And unfortunately, that engagement hasn't really led to anything productive. In fact, it hasn't really led to anything at all. We believe that the approach taken from the very start has been misconceived. We also believe that we haven't been given a fair opportunity to bring forward our proposals or our solution. And of course, this is a very serious problem that will have consequences not just for the local people here in Northern Ireland, but for the wider 370 million taxpayers throughout the UK. We believe, therefore, we have a responsibility to ensure that the problem is resolved properly and permanently. We've repeatedly asked that there be a competition or expressions of interest from interested parties that might come along and help fix this. But those requests have not been acknowledged, and we can see no reason why that shouldn't be done. This is a new way of doing things, and a problem of this magnitude, which has been described as, and I quote, the biggest single disaster, environmental disaster in the history of the UK. In the history of the UK, we believe that an innovative approach is required here. Something new has to happen. So I've done a short presentation here, which I'll quickly run through, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay. I start off with what is the problem, very briefly. We know about it. There's been illegal dumping. Estimates put the amount of dumping somewhere between 1 million and 1.6 million tonnes of waste, so it's a massive tonnage. There are very serious environmental implications, as we all know, and there are very serious economic implications. The economic implications or economic consequences, briefly, is the clean-up cost itself. There's the contingent liabilities of not doing the job properly. There's the impact on the agricultural industry in Northern Ireland. There's the impact on the drinking water. There's an astonishing memo to the Minister in 2020 that Plan B was give people bottled water. I'll come to that later. That's not a very persuasive Plan B in my view. There's an impact on foreign direct investment coming into this country as a result of our apparent disregard for the environment. There is a risk, an ongoing risk of very serious European fines. I'm not quite sure what the impact of Brexit has on all of that, whether there's a residual claim or not. Very serious reputational damage to our local council, where we come from, and Northern Ireland generally. There's been the impact on the A6 progress that has been held up as a result of this catastrophe. And then, as I said, there's the impact on the 31 million taxpayers. We're not here today to complain. There's been plenty of complaints about this for the past 17 years. A sample of some of the press releases. The Minister Atwood at the time said that the cost could run into hundreds of millions of pounds. That was back in June 2013. The then Minister, if I may quote her, Minister Michelle McIlveen, back in 2017, again faced with this very, very serious problem with a really uncertain cost. That's a political nightmare for anyone involved. At this stage, the costs were being quoted somewhere between 20 million and 100 million. Minister Durkan, Mark Durkan, 2019, talks about the ticking time bomb. And more recently, press releases have suggested that the costs and damage could run to a staggering £700 million. One observation at this point I maybe should say is that at this stage, 17 years on, you would have thought that someone might have a better handle on what this thing might cost. But in any event, and Minister O'Dowd more recently said that it's impacting the construction of the A6, which is joining the road from here back to our region in the northwest. So what's our experience been from the timeline? I'm mindful of the stopwatch running here. I haven't got my phone on, I've got a stopwatch just to make sure I get through this quickly. Very briefly, this is what has happened. 2007, the concerns were first raised by the residents, and they were reported to the NIEA. Following anonymous complaints to the council, a report was commissioned by Wilson Engineers. Further complaints were made in 2009, and repeated complaints were made. And it was only when the police intervened, in 2012, that this site was closed down. A Mills report was commissioned in 2013, which talks about the strategic lessons learned. We think that's rather like being on the Titanic and someone saying, well, what shall we put on the menu for our dinner next week? We think that wasn't really where the emphasis should have been at that stage. We think that is where the catastrophic error has been ab initio. Various stakeholder groups have been maintained, and there has been a response by the department. There's lots and lots of data, but no real results. By 2016, we had formally presented our position and our comprehensive solution, which has now fallen on deaf ears. We eventually, through political intervention, got to meet the Chief Executive of the Council in 2019 and the then Permanent Secretary, Dr. Dennis McMahon, who seemed like a thoroughly decent and reasonable human being, interested in all options. But unfortunately, his senior officials were saying, no, the option is to cover this over. The public are saying this is a cover-up. The department officials were saying cover over. I'm not sure if there is a substantive differentiation in the two. We presented our local council in 2022. The department then has commissioned a company called Tetra Tech to develop a remediation option strategy. We say that process may be unreliable for reasons that I'll deal with in questions. And then at the request of the residents and the people who retained us, we asked for permission to come and address yourselves now that we have a government here. So again, we're grateful for that opportunity. And as I said, we're not here to complain, we're here with answers. That's an example of the options appraisal. We'll come to that in detail later. Tetra Tech have done this appraisal. They divide the area up into 10 zones, and then they give them weightings as to the different options to fix this problem, and then they score them. And we can come back to that later. So what are the challenges and what is the new approach? We say the challenges are not just simply fixing this as cheaply as possible. We think there are technical challenges, timing, procurement, legal, financial and reputational challenges. Very briefly, what are the technical challenges? Well, it is a complex problem, but our two technical advisors are the leading remediation contractors, not in this country, but in the world. So we have a world-class team, so we can fix the problem with the capacity and the capability and the experience of doing so. What about the timing? Well, that really depends on the stakeholders and who the stakeholders will be. Our plan imagined erecting a barrier immediately to protect the River Faughan, and therefore the drinking water and the agricultural interests and the fishing interests. We estimate it's going to take 4 to 5 years after the barrier is erected, and then we will wish to monitor the site for a further 10 years to sign off on guarantees and any contingent liabilities that may arise out of it. How might this be procured? We believe that a new model of procurement is required here, so we've hired one of the leading procurement teams in the world to develop new systems of procurement to how this might work. We believe there has to be a proper engagement by public sector, private sector and third sector, and we believe that there should be established a new group to bring this solution forward in a completely open and transparent way. Legal issues, who was responsible for creating the problem? That's not really our business, and we do not support the idea of a public inquiry. Again, why the Titanic sunk isn't really the most important thing. We're interested in fixing the problem. Who was responsible for not intervening? There may be corporate or individual liability for some of the department members. I don't know, that's not really our business. And what are the consequences for them? Again, that's not really territory that we wish to get into. However, there are legal issues that we do wish to explore. Access to land, for example, what the regulatory issues, what the planning issues may be, etc., etc. In terms of the financial implications, there needs to be consideration of what the true cost of the disaster is. It's not simply covering it up. What are the reputational costs? What about the loss of the A6, for example, the loss of investment in this region, the long-term contingent liabilities, etc., etc. And then finally, who's going to pay and how can this be financed? The financing of this operation is going to be a key element. It's going to require expertise and skill, innovation and imagination. reputational. Well, Derry City is now the host to, I quote, the biggest single environmental disaster in modern Western Europe. That is not something as a person from the city that I want my name associated with. So we want to lead a local solution to a local problem that will send out a message globally that we take our environment serious and that we take business serious. Not only do we take it serious, but we can get things done in this part of the world. And we need to send that message out. It's been 17 years now since the people brought this to attention. 17 years since people have brought it. To date, we've spent over £4 million in consultancy fees. We haven't lifted a sod. We've monitored and we've done some testing. And as I said, the report in 2020, which was, and I quote, we got this in a Freedom of Information. When the Minister asked for an update, he was told by one of the officials, the site presents a live and current risk to the safety of drinking water for 50,000 households in the Northwest, which if realised, and may in the worst case scenario, require the supply of bottled water to those homes. I think it's disappointing that in the year 2024, that our response to a catastrophe like this is that we'll let them have bottled water. I think it's a fairly primitive response. So what's our solution that was presented in 2016? Well, our solution is very, very simple. A substantive protective barrier, excavation and quantification of waste removal and proper disposal, and then the remediation of the site with long-term aftercare that might actually turn into a useful community asset. That's what it really looks like in a picture. The semicircular sort of crescent moon shape at the top, that's where the A6 was supposed to go. And as you can see, it travels over the infected areas. So we want to put a protective barrier protecting the river first of all, identify the waste and then excavate that waste in line with requirements. So for example, the first section to be excavated might be that element that's holding back the A6. And those are just some slides showing what that would look like. There was and has been a credible solution on the table since 2016, and that solution has not been taken serious for no justifiable or defensible reason, we say. Those are our timescales. We understand totally that it's a major problem and it's landed on the laps of the Council and the Department. We understand that and we're sympathetic to that. However, we believe that the approach has been misconceived from the outset, and a decision appears to have been made at the very early stages to try and cover over the waste. And from that time to this, there's really been a campaign of defending that position or trying to justify it. Sometimes it's very liberating to say, you know what, we got this wrong, we don't have the expertise, let's open the door and bring in the expertise. And as I said, an alternative proposal has been on the table for many moons. Those are the points that I wish to make. Mr. Chairman, I think I'm under my 10 minutes, so if I'm not, I apologise. So.
That's fine. Daniel, thank you very much for that concise report and presentation. Very interesting. Can I just ask a couple of questions? Tetra Tech, have they actually established the actual material that's in it?
I'm not sure that they've precisely established that, Mr. Chairman. I think they have a better sense of it at this stage, but they still, I think, work somewhat in the dark. I don't think they've actually quantified precisely.
Really, nobody knows then exactly what's in it, do they?
Well, whether nobody knows or whether nobody's published the results are two different questions, I think. I think they do know what's there, and if they don't know, they should know. £4 million later, I think they ought to know. Right,
so you actually believe that somewhere along the line, somewhere,
yeah,
whether that's council or department or whoever
would know.
Knows.
And again, our approach has been, because of the uncertainty of the quantity and the nature of the waste, our first step was, well, look, if you put a protective barrier, that becomes a less important question, because you then have the time to explore what actually is there and quantify.
Explain the protective barrier. Is that like a trench?
It would be. It would be installed by, I think they are the biggest environmental engineering companies in the world. There's a company called Keller. They dig a trench at the face of the river, and then they put this barrier in. The depth and the width and the length of it would be determined by the assessment of the waste, and that gives a protection for up to 20 years or so, so that the work then could go on. But that would stop the risk of spillages into the water, further spillages into the water.
And I'm assuming, while it's probably not exactly your remit, but where would the disposal of the material take place? Because I'm assuming there's some hazardous material in there that we're assuming that without a report we don't know. But
the promoters of the project had secured an interest in a virgin landfill site, which can be constructed to accommodate whatever type of waste would be there, and that would obviously be guided by regulatory requirements and planning requirements and So that's
That's
what we've done.
basically a new site somewhere.
Yeah,
as
it
you
would be the new site, properly engineered site. Yeah.
Where would the like of that be?
It would be about 13 miles from the site. And the idea there would be, as that has been formed, the stone and the excavated soil from that will be used and to replace that with the waste that was taken out. So
I'm assuming that would have to be like a landfill site that would be lined and would have to go through quite a process.
It's got complex engineering questions, so the member of the team that would deal with that would be one of the leading landfill site construction engineers in the UK and Ireland, so they would be very familiar with that type of process.
Thank you. Nicola Brogan.
Thank you, Chair. And Daniel, thank you for presenting to us here this morning. Listen, obviously it's very stark, the information you're coming with here. It is very concerning, and the fact that it's been known for so many years is also a huge concern. And even the impact it's having, you mentioned there, even the likes of foreign direct investment, the reputation it's having in Derry City, the drinking water and all. It is, and on the A6 as well, and the fact that is a huge concern. So I appreciate you coming and alerting us to it, I suppose. Can I ask just how you think your proposals differ to the strategies that are already there? I know you've said the plan is there. Would you deem, I don't think I'm quoting you wrong, but saying it's a cover up. That the proposals are there at the minute. That's the crux of it. So how are your proposals different to what's there at the minute?
Well, I think just for the record, mindful of potential defamation claims, I didn't say cover up, I'm quoting someone else. I said cover over, I think it was a cover over, which may be the same thing, but just for the avoidance of that.
That's fair.
I'm not a stranger to the law of defamation. So our situation is really different. I mean, without boring you with the entire detail, I think the problem starts in around 1832 when we have the new Reform Act of Government for the UK and Northern Ireland. And what I mean by that is this: you've got really two bodies here that politically represent the classes, and you have the civil service who are really doing the work behind the scenes, who are the permanent presence, as you will. So what seems to have happened is that they say, look, this is a disaster. Of course, it's a politically embarrassing situation. It's very, very difficult to deal with. And the civil servants have basically said, how do we get how do we fix this for the least cost to the public purse? You understand that starting point, but it is wrong, we say. We think that when something like this happens, you really need to sort of be a bit more open and say, listen, this is novel territory that we're in. Let's throw open the doors. So the first thing we ask is, what are the technical challenges? So we believe there was an opportunity for a public sector, private sector engagement to find out what was there, so we all know what we're dealing with. We then believe that there are various procurement models, new procurement models. For example, there's innovation partnerships that were introduced by the UK government a number of years ago that would have allowed a new engagement, a completely different form, rather than it's the department's problem to keep this behind closed doors and try and sort this out. So the entire approach has been misconceived, because what has happened, it's quite like the legal system. You know, a problem happens and the law tries to find a solution. But sometimes there are problems that don't sit within that solution, and sometimes you have to go outside that and maybe say, well, look, we need some tweaking or adjusting. And I mean, there's plenty of examples of that. So our situation is different because what we imagine is a very, very different approach in terms of how it would be procured, the technical way of the technical solution itself, how it would be financed, how it would be funded, how we would engage with the stakeholders, who would own the site long term. So our approach has been completely different. And we believe that it's a better approach, and at least was warranted, a hearing. So completely different. The department's approach has been, look, we've got this problem. How do we do it cheap? Bring in a few consultants, do a report, and without getting into a sort of a critical analysis of the technical parameters on which that report has been based, which we say are misconceived. I mean, so for example, the way that Tetra Tech has been directed to approach this. They assess different options. So say there's 10 different options. Remove the waste entirely, leave the waste where it is, biologically treat the waste, so it could be different options. What they have done is said, okay, let's analyse these across 3 headings: social impact, economic impact, and environmental impact. There are those that would say that of itself, ab initio, is incorrect, because the cost should be irrelevant. It should be the best environmental thing. But that's a different point. But taking all 3 together and they give each weighting. After 6 months, we have been asking questions. Well, what cost did you say that Mr. McGlone's scheme was going to cost? What was Mr. Blair's scheme? What was your scheme? And they've now come back and said, well, actually, we don't have any figures. So if I'm trying to weight your solutions and I'm giving him a 1 because he's the top in the class and you a 5 because you're the worst, I must have some data. they've now said that they don't have data and they don't have costs. So we said, and again, this isn't the forum to challenge the...
Sorry, Daniel, you said, who said they don't have that?
The department,
Sorry.
Dr. Richard Crowe, who's leading the
Okay.
team. Yeah. And this is why I say I'm not sure whether that exposes individuals to individual liability down the line or whether it's corporate liability, but that's what they've said. And it's disappointing because more recently, in fact 2 days ago at the local council, the team led by Dr. Crowe gave a presentation to the local council. And you know, it's persuasive. Look, it looks good. There's lots of figures. But when you get right down to it, when it comes to direct economic costs, it said, insert estimate cost of scheme. And then they tell the local councillors and the local people that they don't have costs. So how on earth can you grade? How can you give me an A star if you don't know what the cost is? So that's why we say that's... Now again, we are sympathetic to the department being faced with a challenge here that, look, we've got a budget of X pounds, so this money is going to... Where's it coming from? Is it education? Is it health? Is it, you know... So, but we say that that's not really the issue here. The issue here is doing the best solution for this country by using the world-class techniques we say.
That's fair enough. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I just want to go back to one of the issues you had highlighted, or not the issue, one of the solutions. So you talked about the protective barrier to protect the water, the river and the drinking water. And then another point was the excavation. Is there a risk to creating like more pollution by excavating, and how are you mitigating that risk?
Well, there's two aspects. That one, there may well be, and two, that's not really my department. That's a technical question. That's why we've got the world-class people involved in dealing with this. As a very sort of a simple starting point, we think there's a much more greater risk of leaving the waste there that will either A, flood into the river or explode. And one of the residents at one of the meetings, the then lead from the department had said to the neighbours, you know, well, do you really want this waste being moved and lorries passing your house? And she said, you weren't that concerned when they were coming past my house 24 hours a day. Yeah. Our starting point is that the waste should not be there. That's the starting point, and therefore it must move. But taking all on board all of those issues, if it's been removed, hence why the structure that we imagine is a body that will have representatives from here and from local council and from private sector overseeing every step of the way. But we believe it can be removed safely, is the answer to that.
Thank you. And finally, I just want to pick up on, you mentioned in 2020 the former minister had received a report to say that up to 50,000 people in the Derry City area, their drinking water could have been affected by this here, and that they'd recommended bottled water. What happened with that there? Was it just was this actually fulfilled or implemented, or was it just left that there is a risk to them?
The exact quote was, the site presents a live and present risk to the safety of drinking water for 50,000 households in the northwest, which have realised, in the worst case scenario, require the supply of bottled water for those homes. So it hasn't happened yet, but we don't believe that you wait till it happens to fix the problem. We think we should.
Risk then.
It is a live risk, it continues to be a live risk. Now there's substantial monitoring going on in the water. There have been instances in the water where there's issues, but again, whether there is or there isn't, there is that risk. Very, very simply, if I owned that land as a farmer and I wanted to go and try and insure it, I think my insurance premium might be in the order of £1 billion for the insurable risk. In fact, it's not an insurable risk because it's an unquantifiable liability. We would know about some of the, historically in this country, where there's some diseases got into the cattle as a result of this type of activity, which almost wiped out our agricultural economy. So you can imagine that the farmers in that area are very concerned, not just locally, but in the wider Northern Ireland field.
Okay, thank you for that. Thanks, Chair.
John Blair.
Thank you, Chair. Daniel, thank you for the presentation. Can I ask two things? The first one's brief, and forgive me if I'm not referring immediately to the original correspondence, but if you could just refresh us on this report and how it was commissioned and who commissioned it, first of all, so your own involvement basically. And then if you could give us, you've answered some of what I was going to ask already from Nicola's questions, particularly in relation to the water courses I've raised here. In the short period of time the committee's been meeting already, the existing and growing threats to our water courses and water quality. And something like this, of course, is at another level completely. But I'm keen to know, as the report was being compiled and in general, what has your own engagement been, the frequency of that, the sort of the format of your own engagement with A, the department, and B, the council in relation to the conclusions of the report?
Are you referring to the Tetra Tech report? Is that
Sorry?
the Tetra Tech report? Is that what you're referring to?
No, your own.
Our own engagement. Well, we were approached back in 2015, I think, originally, by this group who said, look, we want to take this by the scruff of the neck and find a solution.
These are residents and
farmers and business
farmers
people and veterinary people and
okay.
people from the area generally. And they said, look, we're sick and tired sitting around waiting while nothing happens, so let's see if we can take the lead. That's really what kick-started the process. We have spent many hours and many days speaking to the local council, speaking to the department over many years. And that eventually led to the meetings in 2019 with the chief executive of the council and with the permanent secretary. Some of the councillors up in the local area had suggested that we come in and do a presentation to the council, and that presentation was given. The council seemed to have taken the view that they don't have the power to do anything. We disagree with that analysis. We believe the council does have the power to do something, at least put out an invitation for expressions of interest. We believe that local people should be taking the lead in this. I don't necessarily that all problems we need to come down to Belfast to solve all problems. We can sort this for ourselves. We don't really need to come down here. So we've tried to engage. We've been with Dr. Crowe at various times. And the last 3-hour meeting, I said, I must congratulate him. I said, you know, Sir Humphrey Appleton would be proud of you. I said, because we spent 3 hours, and despite being asked 150 questions, you haven't answered one. So we had a laugh about that. I thought that was funny. Because what we really wanted to know was, what waste is there, and what are the costs? What do you say the costs are of fixing this? Now, the recently appointed minister, and I understand that he's just come into office in the past weeks and months. He says there's a quote for fixing this of 107 million. Someone else says 700 million. So, I mean, why is it so many years later that it's still vague? Yeah. So, to answer your question, we have tried tirelessly, and the reason the residents asked to come here today is whether we walk away at this stage, we want to bring it to the notice of this committee that there was a solution. It was economically deliverable. It was the best environmental solution. The team could have led it from a local place. I mean, I'm a dairyman. I would like to take the lead. That's because where I live. That's where my family are. So that's what our involvement's been. And to be frank with you, our experience, I would describe it as disgraceful. It's utterly disgraceful. If it was the private sector, they would be out of business by now. Utterly disgraceful is what I describe it as. So,
thank you.
Rachel?
Yep, thank you.
Tom Buchanan?
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, on the cost of your proposals, obviously you brought forward proposals as to why this should be dealt with and could be dealt with. What cost have you put to that?
Well, we can't put a cost to that, and I'll tell you why we can't put a cost to that. Every time we've asked the department for the quantities of waste, so you're an experienced contractor, I could say to you, I want you to move X tons of waste from A to B. The first question you're going to ask me is how many tons? They refuse to tell us. So, to try and circumnavigate that and bring some common commercial sense to it, we said, well, our approach will be as follows. The protective barrier has a fixed cost, which is commercially sensitive. And in the event that you decide that you will direct a competition, we will come forward and put our full presentation and full cost, how it's the whole package. In terms of excavating, what we imagine is an agreement with local government at a price per tonne excavated. So if it's 5 tonnes, it will be 5x. If it's 100 tonnes, it will be 100x. You will have complete oversight of that process. In terms of the properly landfilling this waste, it will be based on the current rate as applied by the UK government. So it'll be X pounds per tonne. It may well be that some of the waste can be left where it is, for example. It may be, bricks or stones or soil or what it might be. There's no point in moving that from A to B just to incur cost. So that's where we are. But the territory that we are in, without putting out our commercial price, and I should just make a point at this, and I'm not trying to evade your question. We were told by the department that it was too early to involve the private sector. We were told by one local councillor, I won't name, said private sector mustn't be allowed near this, it's too early to involve the private sector. But we've since been told that the very people who were saying that to us were approaching other private sector contractors to do the very same job. So there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes here that would require at least someone to raise their eyebrow. But the cost that we imagine is significantly less than the figures that have been quoted publicly. which makes us even more alarmed as to why on earth we can't come and at least answer your questions. So would you please direct the department to tell us what the waste is there, and I'll give me 28 days and I'll give you a price.
Yeah, but surely whenever you're looking at this particular site, and you have the people come in to look at it to bring forward a solution for it, you'd have somebody there that would be able to look at the site, measure it up, and give a fairly good idea of how many tonnage is in that site. You didn't do that.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure what your question is.
Whenever you'd be looking at the site to bring forward a solution.
When you say you, do you mean us?
And you're talking about your problem is about giving a price for doing this is you don't know what tonnage is there. Would you not have had someone to look at that site who would have been able to measure it up and give you some idea as to what tonnage is in it?
No. I'm not sure if you quite took the point I made earlier, which was this, is that for the past 10 years we've been engaging with the department to reveal that information. They have privacy over that information. For 7 of those years, they said that the reason they couldn't discuss that was the fact that there was ongoing and parallel litigation pursuing the people who put the waste there. So this isn't a small contractor going to price a job and me going on the site. We didn't have access to the site. The people who control that information in the department, they're the very people who have stonewalled us in terms of that information. However, that does not protect, or that does not prevent us from bringing forward a solution, because our solution was based on the protective barrier, plus then identifying the waste and then agreeing a price based on that. So to answer your question, no, we didn't do that, and the reason we didn't do that is that we were not permitted to do that. We would very happily go on that site tomorrow and do our own analysis. There's an abundance of data now there that should be released and could be released that would allow us to finally price it. But the very problem that I'm bringing to this committee is that lack of transparency has prohibited and frustrated and almost been impossible us giving a precise figure. However, having said all of that, based on an estimate that has been published of between 1 million cubic metres and 1.65 cubic metres, we have a ballpark assessment of that. But I mean, it would be really ridiculous, wouldn't it? I mean, if you're involved in contracting, you're not going to give me a contract price, are you, when you don't know that I'm actually going to move 10 tonnes instead of 9 tonnes. So, to answer your question, we have been frustrated and blocked from getting that information. However, based on the information that was eventually released by the department, we are satisfied that our solution is still the best, and indeed is probably more economical. It's a cheaper solution, we would say. So.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Right. Anybody else? Any other members? No. William, did you?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Number one, I'm no fan of landfill sites because I believe even the legal landfill sites will create a problem for generations to come. Sooner or later, there will be problems with sites. This particular site is illegal and has potential for risk. But there's a river very close by, isn't that right? Yes. Has there been any leakage or any sign of leakage to that river as yet?
There has been.
Has been?
There has been.
Yeah.
And hence why, but more importantly, there's an ongoing threat identified in September 2020 that resulted in the possibility of bottled water. So there is that ongoing threat. And I take your point that not everyone's in favour of landfill sites, but I think legally and from a regulatory point of view and from the current state of environmental management, I think a legally, properly constructed landfill site is infinitely better than an illegal one that has no coating, no casing, that is proximate to a river.
There's no doubt about that. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
No, and you may know as well that the River Fohan runs into it's a cross-country thing, isn't it? Because there's the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland as well affected by that. So.
Okay.
And then just, you mentioned a figure that the Minister had indicated of costings. Was that 107 million?
I think the Minister, one of the more recent, there was a question brought to the Minister and he referred to, I believe 107 million was mentioned. It's on TV. So
I can't find it just in the written questions because I was looking at one that asked the Minister specifically for the estimated direct and indirect costs for each of the options considered for the Mobuoy remediation project, broken down by each of the zones, so it's quite specific. But the Minister indicated that he couldn't provide a breakdown as requested because the remediation strategy will shortly issue for public consultation. So what he was saying was in process. So I'm interested as to where you got that figure.
It's on the live speech that I made in the Stormont Parliament. So.
In the Assembly?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So there was that direct question. I think it returns to later on. I'm not sure whether I said the cost of the preferred solution was 107 million or a solution was 107 million,
Okay.
but certainly the figure of 107 million.
Just briefly, it's my recollection that there wasn't a definitive amount quoted as a solution at all, because nor do I know how there could possibly be such a scenario, given that tests as of now would have to be done, and any tests that were done or estimates or assumptions that were done 7 or 8 or 9 or more years ago, the figures would have changed potentially quite dramatically between then and now. So I don't think there were definitive figures suggested, and I can absolutely understand why that would be the case.
Look, we'll check all that out, Daniel, and but thank you for your presentation. Thanks for bringing it to the committee. We have a number of queries that I'm sure we will now be following up with the department around it, and we're happy to keep in contact if that's fair.
Do you mind just if I asked a question before I go? Because the only reason I've come here is to bring this stuff to your attention. In terms of, I'd like to ask this individually and as a committee, is there any objection, does any member of this committee, would they object to any, a step being taken where an invitation was put out to stakeholders to bring forward proposals for solutions? Would any of you individually or collectively have an objection to that?
Well, I suppose without knowing the entire context of it, I think the principle of it, I don't think would probably have an objection with, but I have to say we would need to look at the detail to see around what that entailed and what the basis of it was. I'm more concerned about knowing exactly what the department know at the minute, and others, department and council, because I do clearly think, from what you've said, there's probably more information there that's not been made available that could help, and could help with maybe some of the queries that Tom Buchanan has raised around costs and that. So I do think we need to explore this a bit more, Daniel, and we will do that if that's fair.
Okay, well, thanks very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay, members. Sorry, just before you go, Daniel, the clerk just has found
Press report.
cost of cleaning up an illegal waste dump on the outskirts of Derry could far exceed 107 million, estimate Environment Minister Andrew Muir has said.
Or exceed.
Or exceed is what's reported in the press for that.
That's reported in the press, that's not taken up.
No.
But we'll check that anyway.
Yeah.
Look, thank you, Daniel, again, and we'll keep in contact, okay? Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the tea.
Members, is it reasonable for us to follow this up? There's a few issues I particularly have with around what information the department actually hold on it, in particular around what waste is in there and what type of waste and how much.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Are you happy that we explore that?
Happy Chair, could I suggest maybe also trying to find out where we are at any stage of planned action, timeline type query, to find out.
Well, in fairness, John, I do think he has answered that, and some of the ministers answered that in some of the questions around bringing forward this remediation strategy. But we can ask that anyway, if that's fair. But I'm really keen to explore what's there. Okay. Any other point?
Sorry, excuse me, Chair. You're talking about like the sort of more technical information. What's the volume? What's the type of waste?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chair, can I maybe, this is an incredibly complex situation, and obviously it's gone on for a very long time, much longer than any of us would have anticipated. There may be a reluctance perhaps maybe to put some of that into writing, but it might be useful maybe if we could request even a briefing from officials, and some of that may need to be taken in closed session, just given some of the complexities and the sensitivities around it. But at least then the committee may get a little bit more information than they may do just in correspondence.
Okay. Well, look. I think we'll ask these questions in correspondence first. See what comes back, and then potentially, I think there's probably a follow-up with what you're saying, Michelle, if that's reasonable.
Chair, I would support
Yes,
that, and my apologies for being late. I couldn't do anything about that. But this one has been about so long. It's really, and we need to do a bit more, if you forgive the phrase, drill down as to why this has taken so long and why remediation hasn't been enacted before now, and to establish what exactly the problems are, because it's one of those issues that has been around so long and has the potential to be an environmental catastrophe, and yet you always get the impression it's been pillar to post. So I really would support us having a session with officials, maybe whenever we hear the response back from the department, to see just what is going to happen about this place.
Okay, so
Chair, sorry, very briefly on that before we'll close. Maybe you need to bear in mind as well that it would be in the Lochs Agency area rather than the DAERA jurisdiction for waterways and fisheries and water courses. Just take note of that in case we need to make separate inquiries there at any point.
Sorry, John, are you suggesting that we have a session with them that date?
Not necessarily, no, but in case we're writing to anybody, would need to bear in mind that the Lochs Agency, I think, would be responsible for that area. Not for legislation, but for checking the water courses, fish health and all that stuff. Potentially.
So what are you suggesting?
Well, if we're writing to the department, they'll maybe refer some of it there anyway.
Okay.
Depending on what our queries are, I'm just saying if we go down that road, it's possibly, but the first query should be with the department.
In the correspondence, could we perhaps suggest that they come to give us a briefing? Because I think given the fact that there's been a lot said there today, it would be useful to get the alternative side to that sooner rather than later than letting that hang.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree with Michelle. I think it actually would be fair to let the department respond to that there and to give us more information on the whole issue. So as well as writing the correspondence and asking the questions, maybe offer them an opportunity to come to committee, either in a formal setting or formally.
And I do think at some stage it would be useful for the committee, for those who haven't seen this, to actually have a visit to the site. Because it's not until you see it that you get a better context of the scale of what it is.
Okay, so we'll write to the department of these queries and also invite them for to present to us. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Sorry, Dave.
I was thinking too that the council was mentioned several times here today as well. It'd be useful to get the responsible council as well. The Council East of Council.
Okay, happy we write to Derry Strabane Council as well?
Yes.
Seeking the information, okay.
Chair, we can of course discuss it further at strategic planning meeting because it may be something the committee wants to do something.
Okay, but in the meantime, let's do
mm-hmm.
that. I found the quote actually from the Minister in the Chamber. Work has been undertaken by consultants on the potential costs and will inform a draft outline business case. I am aware that one of the options contains remediation costs of 107 million, which on a point in time estimate are subject to significant change to the technical development and the timescales over which any remediation may take place. So I think merely what he was saying there was there was a remediation cost of 107 million at some stage for one of the resolutions, but that has probably significantly changed given timescales and what else. Yeah. All right, members, thank you for that. Obviously, it's an issue that we'll have further discussion on as we go forward. Okay, thank you. Agenda item 6 is a briefing from Department officials on the Emissions Trading Scheme. That's the ETS. You'll find the briefing paper from the department at pages 61 to 69 of the pack. You will recall at one of our early meetings we heard from Mr. Coy and started to delve into issues of the ETS in more detail than was appropriate for that meeting. So he has kindly returned to allow us more time to focus on it. So you're all very welcome. Jane, Richard and Anna, You're very welcome here. So you have 10 minutes of presentation, and hopefully you'll be open for questions then. Is that fair?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to committee today, and thank you very much for your interest in the Emissions Trading Scheme. It's an incredibly busy policy area in the Climate Change Division in DERA, and as Chair has invited me, I'll just provide some background to the scheme, both in terms of the history and the operation, and then outline the plans for the future development. So it's probably worth saying at the outset that as a policy intervention, the ETS is a really effective decarbonisation scheme. So it was established in January 2021 following the EU exit, and it replaced the UK participation in the EU ETS scheme. The EU scheme was established in 2005, and the UK as a whole participated in that scheme from its inception. The aim of the scheme is to encourage greenhouse gas emissions reductions where it is more cost effective to do so. The scheme is overseen by the UK ETS Authority, which is comprised of the UK Government, the Scottish and Welsh Governments and DERA, and they work together as equal partners to implement and develop the scheme. The scheme works by making participants purchase and surrender a carbon allowance for each tonne of carbon dioxide they emit. So the more you emit, the more you need to buy. Participants who fail to surrender the requisite number of allowances are subject to penalties, commensurate with the number of allowances which have not been surrendered. A cap is set on the overall number of emissions allowances available under the scheme, and this cap is reduced gradually over time, and this is known as a trajectory. The aim is to encourage emissions reductions. Some participants receive a proportion of their allowances for free, and that is to mitigate against the risk of carbon leakage. So that's the risk that industries move their production to a jurisdiction with less restrictive carbon pricing policies, which could result in offshoring of emissions with no net reduction. The key aim of the scheme is to incentivise participants to invest in decarbonisation, and participants face a choice as to whether to pay for their emissions through buying allowances or to invest in decarbonisation measures to reduce the obligations which they face. They may keep any surplus allowances for use in future years, or they can sell them on to other participants. Essentially, the scheme promotes carbon emissions reductions and also investment in clean, low-carbon technologies. As the price of carbon rises and allowances reduce, it should become more cost-effective for installations to reduce their emissions, for example, by investing in abatement technology rather than purchasing allowances. As a result, the scheme, along with other measures, has driven real innovation in industry to improve efficiency and to adopt decarbonisation measures reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So the UK scheme design is based very much on the EU scheme. The purpose of that is to facilitate the smooth transition for participants from one scheme to the other. It currently covers energy-intensive industry, power generation and aviation. Across the UK, there are 900 participants in the scheme. In Northern Ireland, there are 17 stationary installations and 2 airline operators, and members have been provided with a list of all the organisations and businesses that are currently in the UK ETS in Northern Ireland. So the UK ETS Authority also established the UK carbon market. Auctions are run on a fortnightly basis and provide the opportunity for participants to purchase carbon allowances either for compliance purposes or as an investment to use in the future or sell on. The revenue raised is significant, and as of January this year, just under £15 billion has been raised from the proceeds of UK ETS primary auctions since the launch of the scheme 3 years ago. The revenue goes into the UK Consolidated Fund overseen by Treasury. It is not hypothecated. From inception, the UK scheme was designed to be more climate ambitious than that of the EU, with 5% fewer allowances being made available to purchase than would have been the UK's share if we had remained in the EU scheme. This, however, was not ambitious enough to align the cap of allowances with what it needed to be to align with the UK Government and the devolved administration's net zero objectives. Therefore, in spring 2022, the UK ETS Authority consulted on wide-ranging proposals to develop the scheme to increase its climate ambition. The leading policy proposal consulted on was the implementation of a net zero aligned cap to place the level of available carbon allowances and the rate at which it declines year on year on a net zero trajectory. The consultation also included various other amendments to the scheme, for example, considering a number of technical changes to free allocation policy and calling for evidence on future markets policy to consider the use of a stability mechanism to support market functioning. The consultation also included proposals to expand the scope of the scheme to additional sectors such as waste incineration and maritime emissions, and I'll go into a bit more detail of that when I'm covering the future development of the scheme. So following that consultation, the authority implemented a net zero aligned cap with effect from the 1st of January 2024. The development of the UK ETS is an ongoing process, and in December last year, 2 further consultations were launched into free allocation, which sought views on how better to target free allocation to those participants most at risk of carbon leakage, and future markets policy, which consulted on the detailed design of existing and potential additional market stability mechanisms. These built on proposals first put forward in the earlier spring 2022 consultation. Both those consultations closed at the start of March. The authority collectively is currently considering the responses received to these, and we will update committee as the outcomes of those consultations in due course. You'll also now be aware from the recent letter from the DALO2 committee that the authority plans to issue a number of further consultations in the near future on the expansion of the scope of the scheme to additional sectors. The response to the spring 2022 consultation set out the intention of the authority to include emissions from the domestic maritime sector within scope from the 1st of January 2026, subject to further consultation on the detail of that. It also stated the intention to include emissions from waste incineration within scope from the 1st of January 2028, and again that's subject to further consultation on the detailed design. Consultations are also planned on how the emissions from transport of carbon dioxide to permanent storage would be accounted for under the scheme, and on the potential integration of greenhouse gas removal technology into the carbon market. Copies of those consultations will be provided to committee as soon as we are able to do so. They are currently undergoing a right-round process across Whitehall departments, which would be the normal procedure. So as a consequence of the ongoing development of the scheme and to implement the outcome of various consultations, enabling legislation will be required. The ETS and associated amendments are made under the 2008 Climate Change Act, and under that Act, legislation will either establish or amend an emissions trading scheme, that must be progressed through each of the UK legislatures where they are to have effect. In respect of the UK ETS, this means that each amending statutory instrument must be laid before and will be subject to scrutiny by this Assembly. We will be continuing to engage with committee in respect of any legislative amendments as the scheme develops. It is worth mentioning at this point that Northern Ireland also continues to participate in the EU ETS under the terms of the Windsor Framework, formerly the Northern Ireland Protocol, and this is to protect the operation of the single electricity market on the island of Ireland. There are 6 electricity generators in Northern Ireland which continue to participate in the EU scheme, and any amendments to the scheme made by the EU must accordingly be considered in the context of Northern Ireland's continued requirement to align in respect of electricity generation. Thank you very much, members, and Richard, Anne and I would be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you very much, Jean, for that. Quite complex. Talk me through the process for companies that deal in these, that purchase and buy them. Firstly, how are the emissions calculated? And what is there a baseline then to say that if you're above that, you need to purchase ETS, or if you're below it, you can sell them? How does that work? Explain that to me.
This is a very technical policy intervention. I am going to pass that question to Richard, my colleague, who knows a lot more about how it works in practice.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the question. So basically, companies within scope of the UK Emissions Trading Scheme, they need to monitor their carbon emissions on a continual basis. So throughout the year, they need to monitor constantly their carbon emissions, and then once a year, around about now.
Sorry, is there equipment to monitor this, and who puts the equipment in and who monitors it?
Right, the equipment, there is I don't know the detail. Our regulator would be more familiar with the detail of the equipment that's available to monitor the schemes, or to monitor their carbon emissions, but the emissions themselves, there's recognised technology to do this. Any outcome or the output on the performance of those monitors and the equipment is that the outputs of that is verified then. So the company monitors their emissions on a continual basis, and then whenever they're submitting those emissions reports to the regulator for assessment, they have to. There's a variety of companies out there called verifiers who are accredited to the UK Accreditation Service standards, who would be competent to make sure that the emissions that the company have recorded and are reporting complies with the relevant standards. So this is a standardised process whereby the emissions that are the reports that are submitted by each of the industries is assessed against this verification standard to make sure there's a level playing field in that context. Okay, so
where's the baseline? Where's the baseline that you're either above or below? Who sets that?
Oh, right, in terms of what? Okay, well, first of all, you have to report everything. So you need to capture all of your emissions, okay? So companies that are subject or considered at risk of carbon leakage will get a proportion of those allowances for free. Now, in terms of how it's calculated, in terms of how much they should get for free, that's based on the historical emissions. So every 5 years, there's an assessment of how that company, or how much emissions that company has produced over that 5-year period, and then that's used to project how much free allowances a company would be entitled to for the forthcoming 5 years. So anything over and above then that the free allocation entitlement, they would then have to purchase on the carbon market, either directly through the UK carbon market auctions or from brokers who can also participate in the carbon market. So you have people participating in the carbon market, you have the participants, the ETS participants, but by and large it's mainly financial institutions, brokers and that sort of thing who would purchase the allowances and then sell them on in the secondary market.
So there's middle guys in this too?
Yeah. So you have what's called compliance operators and non-compliance operators.
Sounds like milk quota many years ago. Where you had all the businessmen and banks, whoever buying it up. Sorry, it shouldn't have been banks, I don't think, but there were other organisations buying it up and making a fortune out of it. So this sounds something similar, is it?
Yeah, I think it's probably important to note at this stage too that because it's a financial scheme, there are market controls and there's legislation set under the Finance Act, under the control of His Majesty's Treasury, whereby that's the oversight of the scheme is done by the Financial Conduct Authority, and there's legislative instruments that confer powers on the Financial Conduct Authority to oversee the scheme. So there are checks and balances in place to make sure that the market is operating correctly and it's protected against market abuse.
Wonder what all that is though. I have to say it's so nobody can get this free allocation for the first 5 years, is that right?
Well,
because they have to take 5 years, you said, to make their assessments and to get their baseline.
Right. No, you can get your free allocation straight away. Okay. So your free allocation is based on, I suppose, because the EU ETS come in a lot more in advance of the UK ETS. The companies that come in to the UK ETS already had historic data that was gathered under the EU scheme, so that was then used to calculate the free allowances that the companies who then entered the UK scheme, what they would be entitled to. So that's what they were entitled to from day one. We're about to actually enter another phase of the UK ETS where that data collection exercise will be considered again, and the free allocation considered for the next 5 years.
Like an update of their...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And finally, for me, just checking, why do you allow, or why is it allowed that there's a third parties to be involved in the purchase and sale of these? Why can it not just be one company buy it of another directly? If one company has some to spare to sell, then another company can buy it, instead of having third parties who, I'm assuming, aren't doing it for the goodness of their heart. They're probably making quite considerable financial gain out of it.
Yeah, I suppose the carbon market is a market like any other commodity, so there is the potential for other parties to get involved and purchase allowances and withhold them, I suppose, until they perceive that the price of carbon might go up and sell them on again in the future. I suppose it's similar to the EU scheme. It's probably the simplest way to answer that question. And the EU scheme has always been non-compliance parties who've partaken in the carbon market. And I suppose it's a recognition that market trading isn't the bread and butter of these guys. I mean, say, for example, the likes of your dairy sector or your glass production sector, they aren't market traders by profession. So they then employ these other companies who, it is their profession, they know more about the financial markets, to sort of make those decisions for them, to buy their allowances for them, and then they can buy them off them, because I suppose the simple way to answer it is that they're just not experts in playing the financial market. I know myself, I wouldn't have the first clue where to start if I was to go and start thinking about buying, selling and trading in carbon allowances or any other commodity. So I suppose it's a recognition of that.
Well, I think if the process was simple enough, it would allow them to do that instead of having to go through third parties. Anyway, Michelle.
Thank you. It's all very complex and every day is a school day. Just if you could bear with me, and thank you for the presentation. It's just in relation to paragraph 11 of the document that we received just in advance of it. And it's just in relation to the amending directive of the 10th of May, which amended an original ETS directive, which is obviously going to impact Northern Ireland specifically. And you've mentioned within that the inclusion of waste incineration within the scope of the EU scheme, and the fact that this has come into force at the beginning of this year. So I'm sort of curious as to how the UK government then has viewed this, whether they have viewed this as a new law or an amended law, whether an applicability motion is required. So I'm really just sort of curious as to how that sits, because I see sort of further within that paragraph then, obviously, dear officials yourselves are looking at how this is going to impact in Northern Ireland, and then sort of setting that aside some of the consultation work that the mainland are looking at with regards to how they're going to include waste within their ETS. I suppose I'm thinking about how there's going to be any divergence and what that will mean then for Northern Ireland, setting that aside the rest of the UK.
Okay, thanks very much for your questions. There's a few there. I suppose I'll address your first point first, which I think was, is this a new regulation or is this considered an amending regulation? This would be seen as an amending regulation because it doesn't replace the original directive, it just amends the directive, so it would be seen as an amending regulation. How or when or if we need to implement this in Northern Ireland is still subject to, we were having these discussions with the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, and we're going to need engagement with the European Commission as to whether they determine whether or not this falls within scope of the Windsor Framework. It would fall within scope of the Windsor Framework in relation to EU ETS if it affected the operation of the single electricity market in the island of Ireland. At the minute, what has come into force in the EU for waste incineration is only the obligation to monitor, report and verify your emissions. There's no requirement to purchase carbon allowances or participate fully in the scheme. So there's a question mark, I suppose, as to, because there's no financial aspect in terms of buying and selling allowances, there's a question as to whether that's a consideration in terms of electricity generation. Is it a cost? Can it be perceived as a cost? Okay, so that's something that we're looking into at the minute. As if the EU decide that really we should be implementing this in Northern Ireland, we need to look at this in the context now of the Windsor Framework implementation regulations that came into force last week that extend or that confer direction and control on Whitehall ministers to implement the various constituent parts of the Windsor Framework. Now, at the minute, there are, I think, around 20 instruments that the Secretary of State has indicated that they would intend to exercise direction and control in terms of the Windsor Framework. And the EU ETS directive is not one of those areas, but we would have to consider how we would implement that in Northern Ireland and what scrutiny process it would have to undergo there in the context of any guidance that would be developed in relation to those Windsor Framework implementation regulations. So I suppose it's a work in progress at the minute, but it won't automatically apply, and even if the EU decide that it does apply, it'll still be subject to whatever processes are in place at the minute in terms of taking this through the Northern Ireland Assembly, because any regulations that are made to amend the regulations that allow us to participate in the EU ETS will have to be subject to the appropriate scrutiny. So yeah, it's a work in progress, but obviously we'll keep committee informed as to how those
I know, thank you for that, 'cause I wasn't quite sure really from the presentation whether that we'd sort of missed a step or whether we'd sort of fallen out just with the timelines.
To be honest,
as to whether we could then
between
scrutinise
you
more.
receiving things are just moving that quickly in terms of our understanding of the implementation regulations, and there's still a lot of uncertainties about how it applies to various different policy areas. So it's good that we have got this opportunity today to provide whatever update we can. But that advice that you have received there was drafted, I think, last week, and things have moved on. So it's quite right you asked the question. Thanks for that.
Well, would it be possible to get sort of an updated version of that aspect of that, just from reflecting what you've said for the committee?
If you don't mind, I would like to wait until we've got the departmental guidance drafted, that I know is in process at the minute, and then to give you a view then.
Okay.
As again, we probably won't have an answer from the EU as to what we need to do, in their opinion, but it would be able to hopefully have more certainty as to what the process might be here. So once we know that, yes, absolutely, we'll update.
It would just be useful to get an updated note then whenever you have that information, just for committee information.
You also mentioned consultation.
Oh yes, the consultation.
Yeah, so they're going to be coming out quite soon, but it works, like it genuinely works as a joint authority across the 4 nations, and it'll be coming out to Northern Ireland at the same time as it's everywhere else, and the views are taken on in the same way.
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry Michelle, I missed that point there, I didn't address that point. The consultation that's being taken forward, well, it doesn't just affect the rest of the GB, it actually affects Northern Ireland as well, because there is that uncertainty as to whether the waste incineration sector is going to be caught here. So, but that consultation will be taken forward on a UK-wide basis, so Northern Ireland installations will have the opportunity to comment on that too, whether or not the Windsor framework applies.
Perfect, thank you very much.
Right, finish, Michelle? All right.
Thank you.
Nicola, Brogan.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the 3 of you again for your presentation. It is very complex and there's much for me at the minute, but I appreciate you taking time to try to explain it to us. I just want to ask about so this is based on the EU's Emission Trading Scheme. So this has been deployed here since 2021, all right? Like, how successful has it been in the overall targets, reducing carbon emissions overall? Like, even within the EU beforehand, have other countries found it beneficial, or how successful do you think it's been?
Sorry. Yeah, no, you might know it off the top of your head, do you?
I was just going to say, in terms of the Northern Ireland context, since the inception of the EU scheme back in 2005, there's been I think it's around 39% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions within those sectors. We've actually, I think there's been an update on that. I think in the last couple of days, from talking to our regulator, there was a significant decrease in greenhouse gas emissions between 2022 and 2023 in the traded sector. And I think the figure now is something like there's been a 52% reduction between 2005 and 2023 in greenhouse gas emissions within captured sectors.
But that's encompassing other schemes, not just...
No, that's just solely within the Emissions Trading Scheme.
Yeah, I mean, this would need updated as well, but it's just the traded sector in Northern Ireland, it's the equivalent of 2.3 megatons have been reduced.
And then will you use, presumably we'll try to build upon that as you reduce the cap. That's kind of the scope of it.
That's the intention, that the cap as it reduces, the number of allowances that are available for companies to purchase reduces. So the theory is that it becomes more cost effective to invest in decarbonisation technology rather than continuing to buy your carbon allowances.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. John Blair.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks to the 3 of you as well for the presentation. I'm recalling some of this from the previous mandate, and the updates are very useful. But I'm intrigued by this consultation on whether or not to expand the scheme, and probably very happy that might happen, to include, for example, waste incineration and energy from waste and the domestic maritime sector. Is that because these sectors have been identified as being as particularly high in terms of emissions? And if that is the case, why were they not included, if you know this, in the original scope of the scheme?
Well, they weren't included in the original scope of the UK ETS because at that time the scope of the UK ETS completely mirrored the EU scheme to facilitate transition for new participants and to allow the new scheme to bed in. Yes, you're quite right. These are, I suppose they're considered high emitting sectors, and they're also considered that sectors that, you know, there might be options now available to allow them to decarbonise. Say, to use another example, the agriculture sector, we're just not 100% sure about how they could decarbonise at this point in time, so now is not the right time to include that sector. But we think now that the methodologies out there, the technologies out there to allow these sectors to be included within the scheme. The EU are considering, in fact not just considering, but have implemented with respect to domestic maritime from the 1st of January this year on a phased basis. So they're bringing that in on a phased basis, and from 2026 the domestic maritime sector within the EU will be fully within the scope of the scheme.
Okay, no, that's useful, thank you.
All right. Okay, John.
I'm happy enough.
Hey,
Thank
Patsy.
you.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. 2 or 3 wee observations. I'm not asking you to answer for the Department of Health, but it's unusual there that there are a number of hospitals participating in it and others who aren't, or which aren't. That's my first observation. Second observation is that in the aviation ETS scheme, it appears there that the only firms that are involved in it are those that have a Dublin headquarters. Wondered, is there any particular reason for that? Are some of the UK-based airlines or aviation firms not particularly interested in it? Third, then, bringing it on to the process that you mentioned there earlier, I'm intrigued by that. And forgive me, I'm not an accountant by any means, manner or fashion, but I'm intrigued by the process of the verification, number one, and then the 5-year process as well. Now, in terms of the verification, who employs the verifiers? That's the first question. Second question, who oversees the verifiers to make sure that, in fact, they're verifying properly? And then, in regard to the 5-year bit, what does that involve? Because presumably, and well, we all know this, a lot of issues on production and emissions and all can change within a 5-year period at a company. So those are just the observations that come to my mind. Maybe I'm missing a bit there, but it'd be helpful to me if you could answer those, please.
Okay, if you don't mind, I'll start with the verifier questions because fresh in the head, and that's probably the most complex question you've asked. Who employs the verifiers? The verifiers are employed and paid by the ETS participants. So it's by the company. So the company pays them. Who oversees them? Well, they're accredited to a standard. I can't remember the reference number, but it's overseen by the UK Accreditation Service. So they need to maintain their accreditation under the UK Accreditation Service for the particular verification process.
It's not accreditation that I'm worried about, because you get accreditation. Yeah. But what's the process by which they're overseen to make sure that what they're doing is in fact not managing figures, but and is there any process by which there's a dip-in mechanism? We might just say the likes of HMRC would do the likes of the same.
Yeah.
Maybe if you don't know, you can get back to me. But I would be very interested in that, to establish if there's some sort of oversight or occasional mechanism by which the accreditation body or some other oversight body nips in just to see that what's being done has been done properly.
Right. So the process is the company, they monitor the emissions on the annual basis. They submit that to the verification company to get it verified. That is then submitted to the respective national regulator. In Northern Ireland's case, it's the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, and they would then check that. They would then send that to the registry administrator, who is the English Environment Agency, who oversee the UK registry for everyone.
Yes.
And they put it through what's called a UBI tool. I would have to get back to you on what the UBI stood for, but a UBI tool checks those emissions before they're actually uploaded to the registry, and then the actual...
I'm getting that, but does you say it passes to NIA? Does NIA have an audit role as to how this has been actually done?
Yeah, NIA would see...
From what we're hearing, NIA is stretched and pulled whatever direction. So it's that process of verification of that, in fact, the returns are in fact properly done.
Yeah, I think I would probably like to revert back to NIA to get you an answer and get that to you.
That's okay.
Just to see what exactly their role was. But my understanding is that they look at both the non-verified and verified emissions. and make a comparison, and then whenever they're content, they then send either address any queries back to the company or send those on to the overall UK Registry Administrator, which is the English Environment Agency. But I would like to get that.
I would like to get that clear, please, just because, not being in any way cynical, but you know, things can happen. So,
Yes.
The other issues then.
Yeah. So in terms of emissions going up and down, and you know the variation in companies' emissions and production and that sort of thing. So I suppose that once every 5-year process is to take into account for that. But also, in addition to that, it's what's called the activity level change process. So that every year, whenever the regulator gets the verified emissions, they'll check that over the previous 2 years' emissions data. And if that varies by plus or minus 15% in terms of the level of emissions, then there'll be a reassessment as to what the free allocation entitlement would be for that company. So that's carried out on an ongoing basis, as well as the 5-year process. The 5-year process is there in effect to give that company certainty for financial planning purposes as to what they can expect. But if there are unforeseen circumstances, and COVID would be an example, you know, if there are unforeseen circumstances that would affect a company's emissions and production, then that's taken into account on a rolling basis, looking at the previous 2 years' activity level.
Sorry for labouring this point, but who does that bit? In other words, during COVID, I would reckon some of the food companies with their production be way up, right?
Yeah.
So who does that check-in audit bit, whether there's fluctuations up or down, or whether the company has in fact expanded at a pretty big rate? That's what I'm trying to get to the bottom of.
Yeah.
Because it's in that bit there that things could potentially go wrong, either by design or otherwise, and that's.
So that's the assessment of the activity level change process is carried out by the regulator. As I say, that's NIEA here. That's then submitted to their findings are then submitted to the Central Registry Administrator, who then present their their assessment of what the NIEA assessment has been to the UK ETS Authority. The UK ETS Authority are representatives from the 4 governments, including ourselves. So we would then be presented with the information provided by the regulators in terms of the activity level changes, and any justifications that have been made, you know, submitted by the company to explain why their activity has gone up or down. And it might be, as you say, that the food production has gone up for such and such a reason, or something else has happened within the company to affect their production. They don't just look at the level of emissions. If there is that sort of difference in emissions that triggers the 15% plus or minus threshold, that will then be looked at by the regulator in correspondence with the company to determine what that is. Has it been a reduction in production efficiency, in efficiency of production? Has there been something else happened within the company that's affected that before they make any assessment and recalculation of free allocation assessment? So that.
But you're going to check about an actual audit mechanism.
Oh yes, absolutely.
NIEA. Sorry, Chair. Just the other 2 points then. The airlines and the Department of Health.
Yeah, so I think the aviation ones, in terms of the ones that are listed that we've shared with you, it's just based on their headquarters. So airlines that would be familiar to us here, flying of airports here, or just have their headquarters maybe in Scotland or in England, and that they're on their ETS. That'd be fair to say.
I know. Yeah. I know where you're exactly what you're picking up on there, Patsy.
Yes.
The Aer Lingus office is Aer Lingus Northern Ireland Limited. So the wing or the arm of their business that's based at George Best City Airport, not the Aer Lingus that's based in Dublin. The Aer Lingus based in Dublin would be, I suppose, regulated by under the EU ETS. But any journeys that are made by Aer Lingus, you know, the Aer Lingus, not Aer Lingus NI, but the overall Aer Lingus, but if they're running journeys between NI and GB.
I might be having a dumb day, but are there no other companies with headquarters at...
Not in Northern Ireland. Those are the only 2 airline operators that are headquartered in Northern Ireland, yes.
Grand.
So, there's a considerable number of airline operators.
Sorry, the health issue then?
Oh yes, in terms of the hospitals.
Yes.
So the hospitals are, it's
Size.
Yeah, it's
Size
basically size.
Yeah.
So it is. So it's the size of the hospital that dictates the threshold. You know, are they caught or are they not caught? So do they fall above that 20 megawatt thermal input threshold?
Okay. Right. Thank you.
Thanks. Declan.
Thank you for your presentation. The scheme itself is based on incentivisation, and I suppose Is there a danger that for some companies that it could be cheaper to buy carbon units than it would be to actually make changes to their operations to reduce the actual amount of greenhouse gases emitted?
Thanks for that question. Yes, that's absolutely the case. That's, and at the minute you could argue that that is exactly what the case is, because at the minute the carbon price is it's probably nearly at an all-time low in the UK ETS. Now, there's a similar pattern happening in the EU scheme, but it's just not quite at such a level. But I think yesterday the auction price for the sale of a carbon allowance was £33.50. I think now that's down from a high of £90. So at the minute there are, I suppose there's probably a perception in the market there's an oversupply of allowances, so that's probably why they're so cheap. But that's because the net zero cap hasn't bit yet. So the net zero cap, even though it was implemented from the 1st of January this year, there was some unallocated allowances that hadn't been allocated during the first part of the UK ETS that have been added to the auction pot to sort of smooth the transition from companies. So there wasn't a big steep drop off from 2023 to 2024 in volume of carbon allowances to smooth that. So, and then as Jane mentioned during the presentation there was a consultation that recently closed on market stability mechanisms, and one of those market stability mechanisms is looking at the role of a supply adjustment mechanism, and what that is the authority would then monitor the number of allowances in circulation, and if it was perceived that there was too many allowances in circulation, then it could pull some, with the hope of not influencing the market, but to support the market to deliver that decarbonisation by sort of setting that price on a more upward trajectory to make it more financially sensible to invest in decarbonisation technology, with the assurance that the market was going to be managed, not overly managed, but overseen to such an extent that to try and prevent a crash, to allow people that long-term certainty so they can make those long-term investments in decarbonisation. But yes, you're quite right, the level of carbon price at the minute is below what we consider would be what we would want it to be.
Just briefly, I just want to explain one more time. See the source of these units. Are these from designated companies on the list? No, who can? Where do they come from? Where do the units come? Do they come from designated companies who have surplus ones? Obviously, they've measured their emissions, and where do they come from in the first place to be floated on a market?
They're created by the UK ETS authority, and the numbers of allowances that the authority can create is set out in the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Trading Scheme Order 2020. So it sets out the maximum number of allowances that can be calculated year on year by the authority, and that's set on a reducing trajectory. And the net zero cap then will reduce again the number of allowances that the authority can create. So they're created. I suppose they're like you can't put your hand on them, but they're a virtual commodity. But that's limited, and it's set in legislation the amount that the authority can create year on year.
Thank you.
And William Irwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I take it is complex. So, I take it that it's done on a temporary basis. These like a lease agreement. The emissions wouldn't be sold on because would the companies have different levels of emissions maybe on a yearly basis? So would it have to be? It would be done on a temporary basis. It wouldn't be a permanent basis. Isn't that right? Because emission transfers.
So you've got your. Supposed to start off just explain the process. So the allowances are created by the authority. They're then floated for sale in the market, and then whenever those are bought by the individual companies, once they surrender those allowances,
who gets the money?
Who gets the money?
Yeah,
right.
The other company it is.
So from the primary auctions, the sale of the allowances on the primary market, it goes back to His Majesty's Treasury.
Okay.
But if a broker buys the allowances and sells them on to another company, it's the broker gets that money, but they'll have paid the money to the Treasury in the first place to get this.
On a temporary basis, they're sold on a permanent basis.
So an allowance stays in circulation until it's either bought by an installation, allocated for free, or surrendered. So once a company surrenders that back to the authority again, that's it gone. So that's it. Once they submit, say they say for argument's sake, they emit 10,000 tonnes of carbon this year. They submit 10,000 allowances. Those 10,000 allowances are then retired. They're gone.
Okay. The scheme could involve other sectors in the future, you think?
Yes. So there's the in response to the consultation that we carried out in 2022, we noted the intention as the UK ETS Authority to expand to the domestic maritime sector from 2026 and the waste incineration sector from 2028, with an interim period for the waste sector starting in 2026, where installations would just have to monitor their emissions but not buy carbon allowances.
Is it possible that the agriculture sector could come into play in the future then, sometime?
The latest position on that is there's no intention to, at the minute, to expand this to the agriculture sector. I think that, apart from anything else, there's difficulties at the minute in getting accurate methods to monitor and verify carbon emissions from the agriculture sector.
Yeah, but I think that will happen in the future. It looks like that's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, well, I suppose all I can say at the minute is the position is that there's no intention to include agriculture in the scheme at this time.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, look, thank you very much, folks, for that. It was very interesting, and quite a lot of it was quite complex. But anyway, I'm sure we'll get our head around it. And if you're a business out there that's wanting to invest in something new, maybe this is the scheme to be in. You know, where you buy it cheap and sell it on more expensive. It sounds that it'll be floated in the stock market before too long.
Don't misinterpret anything I've said along those lines.
Anyway, thank you very much, folks. Do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, members, we'll have a 2-minute comfort break now. Yeah. Back in 2 minutes.
Committee Room 21. Sound. 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 Committee Room 21. Sound.
All right. Okay. Agenda item 7 is statutory instrument, the British Wool Marketing Scheme Amendment Order 2024. Refer you to pages 70 to 74 of your pack. Letter from the Department to inform the Committee of the purpose, content and progress of the British Wool Marketing Scheme Amendment Order 2024, which will be made at Westminster on a UK-wide basis. Letter notes that the British Wool was established in 1950 and its powers are laid down in the British Wool Marketing Scheme Approval Order 1950. It is a non-financial public corporation and is entirely financed by wool producers. In Northern Ireland, British Wool has been rebranded as Ulster Wool. DEFRA, in conjunction with the devolved administrations, completed a formal review of British Wool in March 2023. One of the recommendations was for the British Wool Board to bring forward largely technical amendments to the 1950 order to enable modernisation of the organisation. The SA will be made on the day that the last signature is received from devolved administrations, and it will come into force the following day. Minister Muir has agreed to co-signing the British Wool Marketing Scheme Amendment Order 2024. I suppose if it's been in operation since 1950 without any updates. Yes, Declan.
Chair, I was looking through my files yesterday evening, and I got a letter received just in May from the department about there was a review. DAFM had a review of market opportunities for Irish grown wool based products, and the outcome of that there was the IGWC was taken forward with the Irish Grown Wool Council, and that includes representatives of the sector here in the north, and also DERA is engaging with them as well. So just I suppose what maybe a question to the department is how does this fit in with this the DEFRA review? Just so.
With the DEFRA, sorry.
This DEFRA, this SA we're talking about here, you know.
All right.
Where does this? I can give you a copy of that letter. You want, sure?
Yes, thank you.
That was from Katrina last year.
Okay, happy enough.
Just where it fits in, what, you know. Yeah.
Great. Agenda item 7, launch of public consultations on 1, a blue carbon action plan for Northern Ireland, and 2, the review of the marine protected area strategy. These are pages 75 to 157 of your pack, written briefing from the department's Marine and Fisheries Division regarding the forthcoming public consultations. Blue carbon habitats include salt marsh, seagrass beds, shellfish beds and kelp, and the department highlights that the aim of the blue carbon strategy is to establish and maintain a framework, monitors and protects Northern Ireland's existing blue carbon habitats and supporting their management, creation and restoration. The consultation relating to the review of the Marine Protected Area Strategy was initially published in 2024. It acknowledges the important role that MPAs play in addressing biodiversity loss and their ability to provide nature-based solutions to address climate change. Are you content to note the forthcoming consultations, and we can receive oral briefings when required?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair, you just said 2024.
Oh, sorry, just for clarification, I said it was initially published 2024, I said it's 2014, apologies for that. Agenda item 8, overview of proposals to produce a statutory policy statement on environmental principles. Members, this is at pages 158 to 233 of your pack. Policy statement will set out how Northern Ireland departments and UK government ministers making policy for Northern Ireland should interpret and apply the principles so that they are used effectively to shape policy to protect the environment. The policy statement will be a statutory document to which Northern Ireland departments and UK government ministers making policy for Northern Ireland will be required to have due regard, I'm not sure, members, of a statutory document of this type. I don't know whether something new because of Brexit. I've no idea. Once the draft statement has been refined in light of the advice from the Office of Environmental Protection and feedback from cross-departmental working group, it is the Department's intention to seek approval from the Minister to issue a public consultation. So I'd hope this can happen at the end of May 2024 with the aim of leading to a draft policy statement led in the Assembly in early November. So obviously this is at a very early stage, but are you okay, members, if we write maybe and ask the basis of a statutory document? Because I'm just not sure what that means. You happy enough with that?
Yeah.
Okay, and it'll all come before us in due time anyway. Okay, members, agenda item 10 is correspondence. Correspondence starting at page 235 of your pack. Is the Department's response dated the 9th of April 2024 detailing the pollution prevention and control District Council's charging scheme. Anything you want to note there, highlight? Members, at pages 38 to 45 and then 46 to 53 in your table packs is correspondence from the Examiner of Statutory Rules. They're nothing relevant to this committee, members. Refer you to correspondence from the Department, pages 54 to 55 in your table papers, informing the committee of its intentions to bring forward subordinate legislation regarding the ban on sale and supply of disposable vapes in Northern Ireland. Any comment or just for noting?
Note.
Okay. Members, agenda item 12, any other business? No. Date and time of next meeting. The committee will meet next Thursday, the 25th of April at Clotworthy House in Antrim for its strategic planning meeting. A pack for the meeting, including directions, will be issued at the end of the week. The next formal committee meeting will be on Thursday, the 2nd of May 2024, 10 a.m. in room 21. We'll now go into private session for the last agenda item, members.
Committee room 21. Sound.